Once upon a time, in a quiet village surrounded by meadows and winding rivers, there lived a gentle young girl named Cinderella. Her heart was kind, her spirit patient, and her smile as warm as the sunlight that touched the village rooftops each morning. Yet, despite her goodness, her life was marked by hardship and sorrow. Cinderella's mother had passed away when she was still very young, leaving behind memories of tender care and words of comfort. Her father, seeking companionship, later married a woman with 2 daughters. At first, Cinderella hoped that this new family would bring harmony and love. She imagined laughter in the halls, shared meals filled with joy, and the warmth of sisterly affection. But soon, she discovered that her stepmother's heart was cold, and that her stepsisters were spoiled and unkind. Each day became a trial. Cinderella was given endless tasks, scrubbing the floors until they shone, tending the fire until her hands grew rough, and preparing every meal while her stepsisters rested in their fine gowns. While they admired their reflection in polished mirrors and adorned themselves with ribbons and pearls, Cinderella wore a single faded dress and shoes that were worn thin. Her only companions were the birds perched outside the window and the small creatures that scurried about the house, who seemed to sense her gentle spirit. Despite the cruelty she endured, Cinderella never allowed bitterness to enter her heart. She moved through her tasks with quiet grace, humming softly as she worked. Her songs carried a sweetness that filled even the most shadowed corners of the house, like a candle's glow pushing away darkness. To those who listened carefully, her voice was a reminder that kindness could survive even in the hardest places. One morning, the quiet rhythm of the village was broken by the sound of hooves and the gleam of royal banners. A messenger from the palace arrived, carrying a golden letter sealed with a bright ribbon. The king had declared that a grand ball would be held in honor of the prince, who wished to find a bride among the maidens of the land. Excitement spread like wildfire. In every home, mothers prepared their daughters, and seamstresses worked tirelessly on gowns. In Cinderella's household, the stepsisters squealed with delight at the thought of dancing in the palace halls. The stepmother, ever ambitious, encouraged their dreams, seeing the ball as a chance to secure wealth and influence. For Cinderella, the news stirred a longing deep in her heart. She imagined the palace lights glowing against the night sky, the music drifting through the air, and the chance for just one evening to step out of her life of labor and into a world of beauty. Yet her hopes were quickly dashed. The stepmother scorned the very idea that a girl in rags could attend such an event. Instead, she ordered Cinderella to stay behind, burdened with extra chores, while the others prepared for their evening of splendor. On the night of the ball, Cinderella assisted her stepsisters with quiet patience. She laced their gowns, adjusted their sashes, and brushed their hair until it gleamed, all without a word of complaint. When at last their carriage rolled away and the house fell silent, Cinderella sat alone by the fireplace. Her hands, weary from work, rested in her lap, and tears welled in her eyes. For the first time, she allowed herself to grieve the life denied to her. In that moment of despair, something extraordinary happened. A warm light filled the room, soft at first, then bright and shimmering, as though the stars themselves had descended into the house. Out of this light appeared a graceful woman, whose presence radiated comfort and wonder. She was no ordinary visitor, but a fairy godmother, drawn by the purity of Cinderella's heart. With a touch of her wand, the fairy godmother transformed the ordinary into the extraordinary. A humble pumpkin turned into a magnificent golden carriage. Small mice became elegant white horses. A lizard was shaped into a dignified coachman. Finally, with a final sweep of magic, Cinderella's rags were replaced by a gown of breathtaking beauty, shimmering with silver and blue. Upon her feet appeared glass slippers, delicate and radiant, reflecting the starlight like crystal. The fairy godmother's magic, however, came with a condition. When the clock struck midnight, the enchantment would fade, returning everything to its ordinary form. Grateful and filled with joy, Cinderella stepped into the carriage, her heart pounding with anticipation. The palace that evening glittered like a jewel. Candles lit the grand halls, music filled the air, and laughter echoed against marble walls. When Cinderella entered, a hush fell over the crowd. Her beauty and grace were unlike anything they had ever seen. Even her stepsisters, who did not recognize her, watched in awe. The prince himself, captivated at once, stepped forward to greet her. Together, they moved across the dance floor, their steps in perfect harmony, as though they had known each other all their lives. Time seemed to disappear as they danced beneath the chandeliers, surrounded by admiration and wonder. But time, relentless and unforgiving, soon caught up with her. As the first chime of midnight rang through the hall, Cinderella's joy turned to alarm. She fled from the palace, rushing down the grand staircase, her glass slippers striking the stone steps. In her haste, one slipper slipped from her foot, yet she dared not stop. By the time the 12th chime echoed, the magic vanished. The carriage returned to a pumpkin, the horses to mice, and the gown to the faded dress she wore each day. Only one slipper remained, glistening in her hand like proof of a dream. The next morning, the kingdom buzzed with excitement. The prince, determined to find the mysterious maiden, announced that he would marry the one whose foot fit the lost glass slipper. Messengers carried the delicate shoe across the land, visiting every household. At Cinderella's home, the stepsisters eagerly attempted to force their feet into the slipper, but no matter how they tried, it would not fit. Finally, Cinderella, quiet and unnoticed, stepped forward. To the shock of all, the slipper slid onto her foot, as though it had been made only for her. In that instant, her fairy godmother reappeared, and with another touch of her wand, Cinderella's rags transformed once again into the radiant gown of the ball. The truth could no longer be hidden. The prince, arriving soon after, recognized her at once. Joy lit his face, for he had found the girl who had captured his heart. With grace and serenity, Cinderella accepted the new chapter that awaited her. Her wedding was celebrated across the land, with feasts and music that echoed for days. Yet what made Cinderella's story truly remarkable was not the palace or the crown, but the spirit she carried with her. Even after she became a princess, she remained kind to those who had wronged her, offering forgiveness rather than punishment. Her gentleness softened even the hearts of her stepsisters, who grew to respect her. And so, Cinderella's tale became one told from village to village, a story of patience, kindness, and the belief that even in the darkest moments, light can appear. She and the prince lived happily ever after, their love shining like the stars above the kingdom. Once upon a time, in a small village near the edge of a great forest, there lived a kind and gentle little girl. Because her grandmother had given her a beautiful red hood to wear, everyone in the village called her Little Red Riding Hood. One morning, her mother prepared a basket filled with fresh bread and sweet honey. She wanted her daughter to bring it to the grandmother, who was feeling unwell and lived in a little house deep inside the forest. Before the girl left, her mother gave her careful instructions. She must stay on the path, never wander into the woods, and never speak to strangers. Little Red Riding Hood promised to obey, and she happily set out on her journey. The path through the forest was calm and beautiful. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall trees. Birds sang cheerfully, and the sound of leaves crunching under her feet made the walk pleasant. But hidden among the shadows of the trees was a cunning and hungry wolf, watching the little girl with sharp eyes. The wolf longed for a meal, and when he saw the girl, he thought of a wicked plan. He decided not only to eat the girl, but also her grandmother. Instead of attacking right away, the wolf hurried down a shorter path, determined to reach the grandmother's house first. Meanwhile, Little Red Riding Hood, innocent and curious, noticed the flowers blooming along the way. She stepped off the path to pick a few, thinking her grandmother would be delighted to receive them. This small delay gave the wolf enough time to reach the little house with the red roof. At the house, the grandmother was resting in bed. The wolf entered quickly and swallowed her whole in a single gulp. Then he dressed in her clothes, pulled the nightcap over his head, and slipped under the covers, disguising himself as the old woman. Not long after, Little Red Riding Hood arrived at the house. As she stepped inside, she felt a strange silence and dimness. Something about her grandmother seemed unusual. The ears were unusually large, the eyes glowed strangely, and the mouth seemed far too wide. She grew uneasy, but before she could understand what was happening, the wolf leapt from the bed and swallowed her as well. With both the girl and the grandmother inside his belly, the wolf felt satisfied. He stretched out on the bed and soon fell into a deep, heavy sleep, snoring loudly. Luckily, a passing hunter heard the strange noises. Wondering what it might be, he stepped into the house. There he saw the wolf lying on the bed, his stomach swollen and round. The hunter quickly realized what must have happened. Instead of killing the wolf at once, he carefully cut open its belly. To his great relief, out came the grandmother and Little Red Riding Hood, frightened but alive. Together, they filled the wolf's stomach with heavy stones and stitched it closed. When the wolf finally awoke and tried to escape, the stones weighed him down so much that he stumbled and collapsed, never to trouble the forest again. Little Red Riding Hood threw her arms around her grandmother, crying with both fear and joy. She understood at last how dangerous it had been to ignore her mother's advice. If she had stayed on the path and resisted the temptation to wander, the wolf would never have had the chance to harm her. From that day on, she promised herself to always be cautious, never stray from the safe road, and never trust strangers. And so, Little Red Riding Hood grew wiser. Her grandmother recovered in peace, and the forest returned to its bright, happy calm. Birds sang, sunlight danced on the leaves, and life was safe once more. And that is the end of the tale, carrying with it a lesson. Obedience and caution can protect us from great dangers. Once upon a time, in a quiet village by the edge of a deep green forest, there lived a little girl named Goldilocks. She was called that because of her beautiful golden hair that shimmered like sunlight. Goldilocks was a bright and curious girl who loved exploring nature. The flowers, the trees, and the tiny animals that lived among the leaves. One morning, when the sky was blue and the birds were singing sweetly, Goldilocks decided to take a walk in the forest. The air was cool and fresh, and the path beneath her feet was soft with fallen leaves. She walked deeper and deeper among the tall trees, enjoying the sound of the wind whispering through the branches. After some time, she realized she'd gone much farther than she'd ever been before. The forest grew quieter, and soon she came upon a small clearing. There, hidden among the trees, stood a little wooden cottage. Its windows sparkled in the sunlight, and smoke rose gently from the chimney. Goldilocks, full of curiosity, stepped closer. She knocked softly on the door, but no one answered. The house seemed peaceful and quiet. Goldilocks waited for a moment, then slowly pushed the door open. Inside, the cottage was warm and welcoming. Everything looked clean and well kept. On a table near the window, 3 bowls of porridge were placed. 1 large, 1 medium, and 1 small. The smell was delicious, and after her long walk, Goldilocks suddenly realized how hungry she was. She went closer to the table and looked at the bowls. The big one seemed to belong to someone large, the middle one to someone smaller, and the tiny one, perhaps, to a child. The golden porridge inside steamed gently. Goldilocks hesitated for a moment, then took a little taste from each bowl. One was too hot, another was too cold, but the smallest one was just perfect, warm and comforting. Without meaning to, she finished it all. Feeling full and sleepy, Goldilocks looked around the cozy room. Nearby, there were 3 chairs arranged neatly by the fire. One was very big and strong, one was softer and medium-sized, and one was small and cute. Goldilocks decided to rest for a moment. She tried sitting on the big chair first, but it was too hard and heavy. Then she sat on the middle one, but it was too soft, and she sank too deeply into it. Finally, she tried the smallest chair. It felt just right, comfortable and snug. She smiled and leaned back happily. But suddenly, with a loud crack, the little chair broke beneath her. Goldilocks jumped up in surprise. She felt sorry and hoped nobody would be angry. Now even more tired, she noticed a small staircase and decided to look upstairs. The bedroom was simple but cozy. There were 3 neatly made beds, 1 large, 1 medium, and 1 small. Goldilocks climbed onto the big bed first, but it was far too hard. She then tried the middle bed, but it was too soft and bouncy. Finally, she lay down on the smallest bed. It felt perfect, warm, gentle, and comfortable. Within moments, her eyes began to close, and soon she fell fast asleep. While Goldilocks slept peacefully, the owners of the house were walking back through the forest. They were a family of 3 bears: Papa Bear, Mama Bear, and Baby Bear. The bears had gone out for a short walk while their porridge cooled, just as they did every morning. They were happy and calm, unaware that someone had entered their home. When they reached the cottage, Papa Bear opened the door. At once, he noticed that something was different. The air smelled strange, and things were slightly out of place. The bears went to the table and saw that their breakfast had been disturbed. The large bowl had been touched, the medium bowl had been moved, and the small bowl, well, it was completely empty. The bears were surprised. They looked around the room and soon saw that the chairs had also been used. The big chair was fine, the medium one was slightly wrinkled, and the small one had been broken into pieces. The bears were confused and a little worried. Someone had clearly been inside their home. Quietly, they walked upstairs. The room was still and peaceful. The large bed looked messy. The medium bed had its blanket folded strangely. And the smallest bed, oh, there was someone sleeping in it. There, under the soft blanket, lay a little girl with golden hair shining in the sunlight that came through the window. She looked calm and innocent, dreaming sweetly without knowing that 3 bears were standing around her bed. For a moment, the bears simply watched in surprise. Then, the sound of their footsteps must have reached her ears, because Goldilocks slowly began to wake up. She blinked, turned her head, and when she saw the 3 bears looking at her, her eyes went wide with shock. Frightened, she jumped out of the bed, ran down the stairs, and dashed out the door. Her feet carried her quickly through the forest path, past the tall trees and the rustling leaves. She didn't stop until she saw the familiar road that led to her own home. Once she was safely inside, she sat down and tried to calm her racing heart. Goldilocks thought about everything that had happened. She realized that she should never have gone into someone else's home without permission. It had been wrong to touch things that didn't belong to her, even if she hadn't meant any harm. From that day on, she promised herself to always respect others' belongings and to think carefully before acting out of curiosity. As for the 3 bears, they were kind and gentle. They didn't stay angry for long. They cleaned up the kitchen, fixed Baby Bear's chair, and made a new batch of porridge. Later that day, they sat together by the warm fire, happy to have their home peaceful again. The forest outside slowly grew quiet as the sun went down, and the soft golden light faded through the trees. Everything returned to normal, calm, safe, and full of the same gentle magic that always filled the forest. And so ends the story of Goldilocks and the 3 bears, a story about curiosity, mistakes, and learning to respect others. Sometimes our adventures teach us lessons that help us grow. And just like Goldilocks, we all learn, sooner or later, that kindness and respect are what make every story end happily. The end. On a peaceful farm, nestled beside a sparkling blue pond, the warm morning sun rose over fields of golden grass. Birds sang sweetly in the trees, and a gentle breeze danced through the reeds. Near the water's edge, a mother duck sat quietly in her nest, keeping her eggs warm beneath her soft feathers. Days passed, and one by one, the eggs began to crack. Tiny ducklings popped out, fluffy and yellow, cheeping softly as they blinked in the sunlight. But one egg, the largest of them all, still hadn't hatched. The mother duck waited patiently. At last, with a small crack, the big egg opened. Out came a duckling, bigger than the rest, with grey feathers instead of yellow, and a long, awkward neck. The other ducklings stared curiously. He didn't look like them, but the mother duck gathered him close anyway. The days grew warmer. The little ducklings followed their mother to the pond for their first swim. The The water sparkled like glass as they paddled and splashed happily. The grey duckling tried to join in, but he wasn't as graceful. He stumbled, splashed too hard, and sometimes drifted away from the group. The other ducklings giggled and left him behind. Each day he tried harder. He wanted to belong, but no matter what he did, he always felt different. When the other animals saw him, they whispered and laughed. Even the chickens clucked when he walked past. The poor duckling began to wander farther from the farm, looking for a place where he might be accepted. He walked through tall grass, across fields, and past rivers that shimmered in the moonlight. The days turned to nights, and the nights grew colder. The little duckling shivered as he searched for food, hiding beneath leaves and bushes to stay warm. Sometimes he watched the stars reflected in the water and wished he could be somewhere else, somewhere beautiful, somewhere he belonged. Autumn arrived. The leaves turned golden and drifted down into the pond. The wind became sharp and cold. The lonely duckling found shelter near a quiet lake, surrounded by tall reeds. He lived there alone, watching flocks of birds flying south across the sky. They were elegant and white, with long necks that shone in the sunlight. The duckling stared at them in wonder. Who are they? He thought, though no words left his beak. How beautiful they are. As winter came, the lake froze solid. The duckling struggled to survive. Snow covered the land, and the icy wind howled through the reeds. He curled up under a bush, his feathers coated with frost. Time moved slowly. Sometimes he dreamed of the white birds flying free above the clouds. At last, spring returned. The sun melted the snow, and the world awoke again. Flowers bloomed, and the lake sparkled once more. The duckling, now grown, stretched his wings and felt stronger than before. He glided across the water, feeling the warmth of the sun on his back. Then one day, he saw them, the same white birds he had admired in the sky last year. They landed gracefully on the lake, their feathers shining like snow. The duckling felt both joy and fear. He wanted to go near them, but what if they laughed at him too? Still, something inside him told him to be brave. Slowly, he swam closer. As he approached, he looked down at the clear water and gasped. The reflection that stared back at him wasn't the image of a grey, clumsy duckling anymore. It was a beautiful white bird, elegant and strong, with wings as bright as snow and a long, graceful neck. He was no longer an ugly duckling. He was a swan. The other swans glided around him softly, welcoming him with gentle eyes. For the first time in his life, he felt at peace. The water shimmered around them, and the breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers. From that day on, he lived among the swans, gliding through the lake as the sun set behind the golden hills. He finally found where he belonged. As the sky turned pink and orange, the swan tucked his head beneath his wing. The stars began to twinkle, and the night grew calm and quiet. The lake reflected the moon like a silver mirror, and the world fell into a soft, peaceful sleep. And so, the once ugly duckling, now a beautiful swan, floated gently under the moonlight, surrounded by his new family, dreaming of the long journey that had brought him home. It was a bright, gentle morning when 3 little pigs set off to build their own homes. They waved to each other, smiled, and began their journeys through the quiet, green meadow. The air smelled of wildflowers and fresh grass, and the sun glowed softly through the trees. The first little pig loved simple things. He found a sunny spot near the hill, and decided it was perfect. He gathered bunches of golden straw, humming as he worked. The straw was light, warm, and easy to carry. By noon, his little straw house was ready, soft, bright, and cozy like a hay nest. He looked at it proudly and rested under the shade, feeling happy with his work. The second little pig wandered a bit farther. He wanted something stronger, so he chose to build with sticks. He spent the day collecting branches and twigs, tying them together carefully. When he finished, his house stood tall among the trees. It made a soft, creaking sound when the wind blew, and he giggled, thinking it sounded like a song. The third little pig was patient and quiet. He found a spot near a stream and began building with bricks. One by one, he lifted the heavy pieces, mixing mud and stacking them with care. The sun slowly drifted down behind the hills, painting the sky orange and pink. When night came, his house stood firm and strong, with a little chimney and a glowing lantern inside. He sat by the window, watching fireflies blink in the dark. Days passed peacefully until one grey afternoon, the wind began to howl. From deep in the forest, a shadow moved, slow, tall, and silent. The big bad wolf had come. He found the first pig's straw house and sniffed the air. The straw rustled softly in the breeze. The wolf took a deep breath and blew, and the house flew apart, dancing through the sky like yellow leaves. The little pig squealed and ran, his tiny feet splashing through puddles. The wolf followed. Soon, he reached the wooden house, where the second pig had taken shelter. The sticks rattled as the wind picked up. The wolf grinned, puffed his chest, and blew again. The wooden house creaked, swayed, and tumbled into pieces. The two pigs ran together, hearts thumping, through the rain toward their brother's brick house. The third little pig opened the door and let them in. Inside, it was warm and safe. The fire crackled and raindrops tapped gently on the window. Outside, the wolf huffed and puffed, but the house didn't move an inch. He tried again and again, but the bricks stayed strong. The wolf didn't give up easily. He circled the sturdy brick house, his sharp eyes searching for another way in. Smoke rose softly from the chimney, curling into the cloudy night sky. The wolf licked his lips and climbed onto the roof, his paws scraping against the wet tiles. Inside, the three little pigs could hear the faint sound of claws above them. The fire in the hearth crackled warmly, its orange glow flickering across the room. The youngest pig quietly added more wood to the fire, and a pot of water simmered gently on top. The flames grew brighter, filling the house with light and warmth. Up on the roof, the wolf finally found the chimney. He crouched, ready to slip inside, thinking it was the perfect plan. But as he slid down, a rush of hot steam rose to meet him. The smoke made him cough and gasp, and the heat singed his tail. With a startled yelp, the wolf shot back up the chimney, covered in soot and smoke. He tumbled off the roof, landing in a puddle with a splash, and ran into the dark forest. His shadow disappeared between the trees, never to be seen again. The storm passed, and the night grew quiet once more. Inside the brick house, the fire burned softly, casting gentle light on the three little pigs. They rested side by side, safe and warm, listening to the calm whisper of the wind outside. When morning came, sunlight poured through the window again. The rain was gone, and birds sang happily outside. The three pigs stepped out, smiling at the clear blue sky. The straw and sticks had blown far away, but it didn't matter. Together, they decided to build again, This time, all three working side by side. They carried bricks, mixed mud, and sang while they worked. It took time and effort, but the house they built together was stronger and brighter than before. By evening, the chimney smoked softly, and the smell of warm soup filled the air. The pigs sat together by the door, watching the sunset paint the meadow gold. Their hearts were light, and the world felt safe again. That night, as stars shimmered above, the three brothers curled up by the fire. The flames danced gently, and the night whispered quiet songs through the trees. The pigs closed their eyes, knowing they had each other, and that was enough. Even the smallest hearts can do big things when they work hard and stay kind. Laziness may be easy, but patience builds strength. And when we help one another, we can make a home strong enough to keep out any storm. Once upon a time, in a faraway kingdom, surrounded by gentle green hills and rivers that shimmered like ribbons of silver, there lived a king and queen who were loved by all their people. They ruled with kindness and wisdom, and under their care, the land prospered. The fields were golden, the gardens bloomed year-round, and the castle, with its tall towers and shining gates, stood proudly beneath the open sky. Yet for all their happiness, the king and queen carried one sorrow deep within their hearts. They had no child. The castle, though grand and bright, felt empty. The laughter of children never echoed through its halls. Every day, the queen would walk through the royal gardens, gazing at the flowers and wishing for a little one of her own. Seasons passed, the first snow melted into spring, and still, their wish remained unfulfilled. Then, one morning, as the sun rose behind the eastern mountains, a brilliant star appeared above the castle, glowing brighter than any other. The people saw it and whispered that it was a sign of blessing. And soon, their hopes came true. A baby girl was born to the king and queen, a beautiful child with rosy cheeks and eyes that shone like morning dew. She was named Aurora, the light of dawn. The whole kingdom celebrated her birth. Bells rang from every tower, flowers filled the streets, and joyful songs drifted through the air. People traveled from far and wide to offer gifts to the royal family. In the great hall, candles shimmered, and tables overflowed with sweets and golden fruits. It was a day of happiness and hope. To bless the princess, 12 good fairies came from across the land. They were radiant beings, each carrying a gift of magic, beauty, grace, wisdom, kindness, song, and laughter. As they gathered around the golden cradle, their wings glimmered like petals in sunlight. One by one, they bestowed their blessings, and the air sparkled with gentle light. But as the last fairy approached, the mood changed. A sudden gust of wind swept through the hall. The candles flickered, and the sky outside turned dark. From the shadows, a tall figure appeared. A fairy draped in black, her cloak rippling like smoke. She had not been invited. Her presence filled the room with dread. Without warning, she raised her hand and cast a curse so terrible that everyone froze in fear. She declared that when the princess turned 16, she would prick her finger on a spinning wheel and fall into an endless sleep. Then, as quickly as she had come, the dark fairy vanished, leaving behind only the chill of her curse. The last good fairy, whose gift remained unspoken, stepped forward. Though she could not undo the spell entirely, she softened its cruelty. The princess would not die. She would sleep deeply and peacefully, until awakened by true love's kindness. To protect their child, the king and queen ordered every spinning wheel in the kingdom to be destroyed. None were left, and no one was allowed to spin or weave. Still, the memory of the curse lingered like a shadow. Aurora grew surrounded by light, laughter, and love. The fairies who watched over her cared for her like mothers. They taught her to sing with the birds, to dance in the meadows, and to see beauty in all living things. Her golden hair gleamed in the sun, and her eyes sparkled like the morning sky. She was gentle to everyone, from the smallest rabbit in the forest to the grandest noble in the court. Her kindness spread warmth wherever she went. But even the strongest magic cannot forever hide from destiny. On her 16th birthday, as dawn painted the sky with rose and gold, the castle awoke in celebration. The air was filled with music and joy, yet somewhere beyond the bright halls, the curse waited in silence. That afternoon, while wandering alone, Aurora discovered a narrow staircase she had never noticed before. It wound upward, cold and dusty, to an old tower long forgotten. At the top stood a wooden door slightly open. Inside, the air shimmered faintly. In the center of the room was an old spinning wheel covered with cobwebs. The wheel turned slowly, glowing faintly in the dim light. Drawn by curiosity, Aurora stepped closer. Her hand reached out, and with the lightest touch, the curse fulfilled its promise. A drop of blood glimmered on her finger. She swayed, then fell softly to the floor. Her long lashes fluttered closed. The fairies found her moments later. Sorrow filled their hearts. They lifted her gently and laid her upon a golden bed, surrounding her with roses and soft light. Then, with tears in their eyes, they cast a spell of sleep across the castle so that none within its walls would suffer the grief of loss. The king, the queen, the servants, even the animals, all fell into deep slumber. Over time, vines grew thick and wild around the castle walls, weaving a shield of thorns that reached the sky. The world beyond moved on, and the tale of the sleeping princess became a legend whispered by travelers. Years turned into decades, decades into 100 years. The forest grew dense and untamed. Birds made nests upon the towers, and the winds carried songs of mystery through the leaves. Inside the castle, time stood still. The candles never melted, the air never changed. Aurora slept as peacefully as she had on that first night. Her face serene, her hands folded over a single rose. Then one day, far beyond the forest, a young prince heard the old tale. He was a wanderer of heart, drawn to stories of lost magic and forgotten dreams. Guided by the whispers of fate, he set out in search of the castle hidden among the thorns. Through days of journey, he rode past rivers and valleys, through mists and fading sunlight, until at last he stood before the forest of roses. The vines were thick, their thorns gleaming like silver in the twilight. But as he stepped forward, the thorns shifted and parted, revealing a narrow path. The forest seemed alive, guiding him, welcoming him. He walked for what felt like hours until he reached the castle gates. Everything was silent. The courtyard lay still beneath layers of moss and thyme. Birds perched motionless on marble statues. The air was heavy with enchantment. Slowly, he crossed the threshold and entered the great hall. Cobwebs hung like curtains of silk, and beams of light streamed through broken windows, catching dust that glimmered like tiny stars. Everywhere he looked, people slept. Guards frozen at their posts, musicians with instruments in hand, servants midway through their duties. It was as though the world had stopped breathing. Yet the deeper he went, the lighter the air became, as if the castle itself waited for something long overdue. Finally, he came to a golden door carved with roses. Beyond it lay the princess, still and radiant, her beauty untouched by time. Her hair spilled like gold across the pillow, and her face glowed softly in the quiet light. The air around her shimmered with faint magic, and the room seemed to hum with gentle energy, the breath of a dream that had never ended. The prince knelt beside her, overcome with awe. In that moment, the curse that had bound the castle began to tremble. The still air stirred. The roses outside began to bloom. Sunlight pierced through the clouds, touching the highest tower. The magic that had slept for 100 years began to wake. And then, as softly as the morning breaks through the night, Aurora stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, and she drew her first breath of life after a century of dreams. The spell was broken. All through the castle, life returned. Bells that had been silent for generations rang again. The courtyards filled with birdsong. The people awoke, blinking in wonder at how time had passed. The king and queen, waking from their long slumber, rushed to see their daughter, tears of joy filling their eyes. The fairies danced with laughter, their wings shimmering brighter than ever before. The vines that once imprisoned the castle now burst into flowers, white and pink, stretching toward the sun. Aurora rose, calm and graceful, as though the 100 years had been but a single night. The world felt new again, bathed in the golden light of morning. The castle echoed with joy, and the people of the land rejoiced. Songs were sung, and the legend of the sleeping princess spread far and wide. From that day forward, peace returned to the kingdom. The fields grew rich again, the rivers sparkled, and the hearts of the people were filled with gratitude. They remembered the long sleep not as a curse, but as a reminder that even when darkness falls and dreams seem endless, love and kindness will always find a way to awaken the light. As twilight settled over the land, the castle glowed warmly against the night sky. The stars appeared one by one, twinkling like gentle promises. The wind carried the soft fragrance of roses through the air, and beneath the quiet sky, the world rested in harmony once more, peaceful, bright, and awake. And so, the story of Sleeping Beauty was passed down through generations, a tale of time, patience, and the enduring magic of love that never fades, no matter how long the dream. Once upon a time, in a quiet and peaceful kingdom, surrounded by rolling green hills and the soft whisper of forests, there lived a man and a woman who were kind at heart and deeply in love. Their small cottage stood near the edge of the woods, where wildflowers grew freely and the sound of birds filled the air each morning. They had a simple but happy life, sharing everything they had and caring for each other with warmth and patience. There was only one thing their hearts longed for: a child. For many years, their house remained quiet, and their hearts felt a little emptier each passing season. Still, they never lost hope. They believed that someday their wish would be answered. Behind their cottage stood a tall stone wall. Beyond that wall was a magnificent garden unlike any other. Every color of flower bloomed there: soft pink roses, bright golden marigolds, and delicate bluebells that danced when the wind passed through. Among the flowers grew the freshest herbs and vegetables, their scent filling the air with sweetness. The garden was beautiful, but It belonged to a mysterious woman who lived in a grand, lonely house beyond the forest. People in the village whispered that she was a sorceress, wise and powerful, but also feared. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and golden light filled the sky, the woman stood by her window and gazed towards the garden. Her eyes fell upon a patch of green plants growing near the wall, tall, graceful leaves that glistened in the light. For reasons she could not explain, she suddenly longed for them more than anything. The sight of them filled her mind, and soon she could think of nothing else. Her husband, seeing her grow pale and weak, was filled with worry. Though he was a good man who followed every rule, love for his wife was stronger than fear. Late one night, when the world was quiet and silver moonlight covered the garden, he climbed over the wall. The air was cool, and the scent of flowers surrounded him. He carefully picked a handful of the green leaves and hurried home. His wife's eyes lit up when she saw them. She tasted the leaves and felt instantly refreshed, as if the life of the earth had entered her. But soon, her desire returned, stronger than before. The husband, though frightened, climbed over the wall again the next night. That was when everything changed. Hidden among the vines, the sorceress saw him. Her presence was silent but powerful, like the shadow of a storm. Though his heart filled with fear, he tried to explain himself, but his words trembled in the night air. The sorceress, seeing both his fear and love, did not destroy him. Instead, she made a promise that bound his soul in sorrow. In return for the plants he had stolen, she would take the child that his wife carried. A life for a life. Time passed, and when the child was born, she was more beautiful than sunlight through morning mist. Her golden hair shimmered like woven rays of light. The moment the sorceress appeared to claim her, the air seemed to grow still. The couple wept silently as she carried the baby away, never to return. The sorceress named the child Rapunzel, after the green plant that had started it all. Far away, deep within the forest, stood a tall stone tower. It had no door and no staircase, only a single window high above the trees. It was there that the sorceress raised Rapunzel. The tower was quiet except for the songs of birds and the rustle of the wind. The child grew with a gentle heart and a voice that sounded like music when she sang. Each day, sunlight poured through the window and touched her hair, turning it to rivers of gold. As she grew older, her hair grew longer until it flowed across the floor like silk. The sorceress brought her food and books, and though Rapunzel had everything she needed, she often gazed out at the forest, watching the birds fly freely and wondering what the world beyond the trees was like. Years passed quietly. Seasons changed. Spring flowers, summer rains, autumn leaves, winter snow. And Rapunzel watched them all from her high window. Her only companion was the sky, and sometimes she would hum to herself, her songs floating like silver threads through the forest below. One day, a prince rode through that forest. He was searching for peace and beauty away from his busy life in the kingdom. As he passed near the tower, he heard a sound so pure and soft that he stopped his horse to listen. It was a voice, singing high above him, filling the air like sunlight after rain. He followed the sound and soon found the tower hidden among the trees. There was no door, no path, only the voice drifting down like a dream. He stood there for a long time, listening. Each day he returned, drawn by the song. Then one evening, hidden among the trees, he saw something strange. A woman cloaked in dark fabric approached the tower. When she reached the base, she called out a few words, and in response, something golden fell from the window. A long braid of shining hair that reached all the way to the ground. The woman climbed it gracefully, disappearing into the window above. The prince understood. The next day, when the forest was quiet again, he returned to the tower. He called in the same way, and the golden braid fell once more. He climbed, his heart racing with wonder and hope. At the top, he found Rapunzel. Her eyes were bright and kind, and though she was startled at first, the gentleness in his face made her feel safe. From that day on, he returned often. They shared stories, laughter, and quiet moments of peace. The days grew brighter, but shadows always wait. One afternoon, the sorceress discovered that Rapunzel's world had changed. When she realized the truth, anger filled her heart like fire. She cut Rapunzel's beautiful hair and sent her far away into the wild woods, where she would be alone once more. That night, when the prince came to the tower, the golden braid was already waiting. He climbed with joy in his heart. But at the top, he found not the gentle girl he loved, but the sorceress, her eyes cold as stone. When she told him Rapunzel was gone forever, despair took him. He stumbled and fell from the tower into the thorns below. Though his life was spared, his eyes were blinded. For many long months, he wandered through forests and valleys, guided only by the memory of her voice. Meanwhile, Rapunzel lived quietly in a small shelter she built in a hidden valley beside a clear stream. Birds kept her company, and she sang to ease her loneliness. The sound of her song drifted far beyond the hills, carried by the wind, until one day it reached the prince. Weary and blind, he followed the song through the forest, step by slow step, until he reached the valley. There, beside the stream, stood Rapunzel. When she saw him, tears filled her eyes. She ran to him and held him close. As she wept, her tears fell upon his face, and his sight returned. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he saw was the one he had never stopped loving. The forest around them glowed with light. Together they left the valley and returned to his kingdom, where they built a new life, one filled with kindness, laughter, and peace. Rapunzel's songs filled the halls, and her hair, though shorter now, still shone like gold in the sunlight. And so, Rapunzel lived freely under the open sky, surrounded by love, the sound of life, and the endless beauty she had once only dreamed of. Every sunset that touched her golden hair reminded the world that even when darkness seems endless, light will always return. And from that day on, songs of hope drifted through the forest, soft, golden, and everlasting. The end.